Hello again and welcome to another one of my cult movie reviews. For this video we'll be travelling to a remote island where there's definitely something fishy going on as we take a look at Sergio Martino's 1979 fantasy horror film, Island of the Fishmen. Set in the late 19th century somewhere in the Caribbean Sea, a group of shipwrecked survivors are washed up on a remote tropical island that rather resembles rural Italy. Led by Lieutenant Ross, as played by Italian B-movie regular Claudio Castellini, they go off in search of food and shelter, only to find themselves being picked off by these strange aquatic creatures which don't appear to be typical of the local wildlife. Fortunately for the few that remain, it seems that the island also happens to be the home of wealthy Englishman Edward Rackham, played by fellow B-movie regular Richard Johnson of Zombie Flesh Eaters fame. It seems he's come there to study the creatures with the help of his friend Professor Marvin, who's also brought his daughter Amanda with him, played by Mrs. Ringo Starr herself, Barbara Bach. But it seems that Rackham's mansion may not be the safe haven they originally thought, as they discover that these creatures are the result of Professor Marvin's genetic experiments onto the local natives. Seems Rackham wants to use them to help him plunder some buried treasure from the ocean floor. But when a volcano erupts on the island and the fishmen suddenly turn nasty, attacking Rackham and his servants, Lieutenant Ross finds it's up to him to try and rescue the girl and escape the island before they're all turned into fish bait. Released back in 1979, the film was essentially an Italian knockoff of The Island of Dr. Moreau, but crossed with Warlords of Atlantis. Both films only came out just a year or two prior to this one. Director Sergio Martino is probably best known for being behind films like The Mountain of the Cannibal God and The Great Alligator, both of which are cult favourites of mine and both of which also starred Claudio Castellini. The latter title also reunited him with co-star Barbara Bach, so if you've seen either of those two then you'll know what to expect here. The film's fun, it's cheesy, and it's got everything you'd expect from an Italian adventure film of this sort. There was actually a slightly different version of this released to American cinemas in the 80s, which was re-edited by the US distributors. Now what they did was they cut around 12 minutes out of it for pacing reasons, and filmed an additional intro scene to kick the action off a bit earlier. This version, entitled Screamers, although it was also released under several other titles, had an additional prologue featuring B-movie regulars Cameron Mitchell and Mel Ferrer, who were part of a group of treasure hunters that come to the island, only to end up being picked off by the creatures. Trailers for this version also featured a scene of someone being turned inside out that wasn't in the actual film. This resulted in a lot of complaints from angry cinema goers, so the distributors had to splice the scene back into it to try and keep audiences happy. This version also overdubbed Claudio Castellini's voice with a more American accent and used a different fishman costume for the scene in Marvin's lab. It was this version that MC Video also released onto tape in the US. However, the aforementioned scene of someone being turned inside out was missing again, as it wasn't in the print for which the master tape was struck. The film was never released theatrically in the UK, although the original European version did find its way onto video here in the early 80s. However, this had about 10 minutes cut from it so that it would fit onto a 90-minute tape. This was withdrawn from sale here though once the Video Recordings Act came in, as it hadn't been classified by the film censors, so could no longer be legally sold. To date, the film has still not been reissued here, although it would probably pass uncut with a PG certificate nowadays if someone bothered to submit it for classification. The good news though is that the film has since been released uncut onto DVD in the US and in mainland Europe, so it is relatively easy to get hold of now. All these releases are of the original European version though, none of which contain any of the scenes that were filmed for the old US release, which some might argue isn't a bad thing, although I think it would be interesting to see these included just as extras, just for curiosity's sake. Now, whilst this isn't the most original of films, Island of the Fishmen is still a thoroughly enjoyable slice of Italian cinematic plagiarism, and is one that I'd hardly recommend to cult movie fans and lovers of Italian exploitation films. The same, though, cannot be said for the seldom-seen follow-up movie that the director made in 1995 entitled The Fishmen and Their Queen, which I'll just mention briefly. Now, this wasn't actually a sequel, it was basically a knockoff of the old 1984 kids movie, The Never-Ending Story, but set in some sort of dystopian future. Now, I think he wanted to make a kids film on the cheap, so he just got some old costumes, reused a bunch of scenes from Island of the Fishmen and After the Fall of New York, then just shot some new stuff just to link them all together. Overall, The Fishman and the Queen was not a very good film and had nothing to do with the original. It has been issued on DVD for those who are morbidly curious, but in my view is best avoided. Anyway, if you haven't seen the original Island of the Fishmen, then yes, I would heartily recommend this to you. It's got everything you'd want from a film featuring mutant killer fishmen, so what more could you ask for?